Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me for today's presentation um, of a Children's Storytime Volunteer Training Program project. Thank you, Dr. Beadle and committee, for joining me today, and a special thank you to Miss Melanie. She is the Children's Librarian at the Pass Christian Library, and she also sponsored this project. My name is Alisa Woods, and I served as the project manager for the Performance Improvement Intervention of the Children's Storytime Volunteer Training Program for the Pass Christian Library. I have been associated with the library for the past few years. I've been a library patron. I have taken my children to the Storytime program, and I've also taken my children to some of the summer activities like the art class and the harmonica class. I have also more recently been allowed to volunteer for the Children's Storytime program, which was very enlightening and insightful. Volunteers are actually vital resources for organizations, both in their roles as volunteers and as promoters, supporters, and advocates for organizations. This is by Piatak and Carmen, and this couldn't be more true than for the Pass Christian Public Library because they only have 8 full-time and part-time employees, and they rely on over 24 volunteers to maintain the efficiency and the operational success of the library and its additional programs. Before we dive into the performance improvement problem, let's start by just getting an overview of the Children's Storytime program. Miss Melanie, she's the children's librarian, and she has been for over a decade, and she runs the Children's Storytime program. She also relies on volunteers to help her. She will develop the content as far as the themes, select specific books that coordinate with the theme, specific songs, and she relies on the volunteers to actually deliver these materials throughout, or present the materials, if you will, to the children during the Storytime sessions. The program is designed for children ages 2 through 4. However, there are siblings that come that are younger and older, but the primary age group will remain 2 through 4. Weekly sessions are held on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. in the community room at the Pass Christian Library. The program focuses on storytelling, not story reading. There's a difference between just reading a story monotone and actually telling a story where you use voices for the characters, you point at the pictures, you may use puppets, you use songs, you make it creative and engaging and effective at telling the story. The program focuses on early literacy development and kindergarten readiness. Early literacy development is focusing on your sight words, your vocab, your letter sounds, rhyming words, and this also prepares you for kindergarten. These two items, your early literacy and your kindergarten readiness, actually align with the Harrison County Library standards set for the Children's Storytime program and align with the Pass Christian Library's mission statement, which is to support and improve the community's quality of life by connecting people with information and each other, by preserving and sharing our history, and providing tools for the future. Now that you've become a little bit more familiar with the Children's Storytime program itself, I'm going to tell you how I became familiar with the problem the Children's Storytime program was having. I first went and talked to Miss Melanie about the project because I don't have work experience. I only have my education, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do for this project. So I wondered if maybe the library wouldn't have any volunteer experiences open, and I would be able to figure out from there what I was going to do. So when I presented the school project to Miss Melanie, she actually said that that was wonderful, that she had had some areas of concern within her children's storytime program. So she voiced to me how she was having the volunteers were having a lack of implementing or incorporating early literacy development within their storytime presentations, how she noticed there was a lack of children engagement, and how she was having inconsistency among the volunteer and participant retention. And so at this point, we talked about what we were going to do moving forward, and it was determined that I was going to observe a few of the storytime presentations, not as a participant, but as a not as a participant, but as a project manager, And from there, I also talked to the volunteers and I talked to other library employees who have been associated with the program at one point or another. And I was able to report back to Miss Melanie that the primary problem that all these other issues are stemming from is that there simply is no structured volunteer training. The volunteers are coming in to present storytime presentations, and they have not been equipped with the proper knowledge and skills to deliver an engaging and effective storytelling session. So this is ultimately leading to the failure to incorporate early literacy skills. A lot of these volunteers didn't even know that early literacy skills were required to be incorporated into their storytelling presentations, and they fail to have the knowledge and skills necessary to actually implement these skills into their storytime presentations. This is also leading to the lacking of children engagement. There is proper engagement methods that are utilized during storytelling presentations to maintain the attention of children ages 2 through 4. And without the proper volunteer training, these volunteers were not being equipped with the proper methods for maintaining children engagement. Therefore, they were lacking the children engagement during their presentations. Ultimately, this leads to no consistency among the volunteers. There is no proper structured training program, and so when each volunteer presents each week their storytelling presentation, one week you might have a very engaging volunteer who's using a ukulele, she's using songs, she's using puppets, and then the next week you might have a volunteer come in and he's simply reading the book because that is what he thinks he's supposed to do. There is no structured method for how the volunteers are supposed to present the storytelling presentation to ensure that they effectively engage the children and provide a satisfying storytelling presentation. Now, once we determined that the main issue was that there was no structured volunteer training program, we met and we decided that the best plan of action to address these volunteers' performance skill gap was going to be to implement the performance improvement intervention of a structured training program for these volunteers. Now, this actually is supported by Piatek and Carmen, who state that providing structured training is one of the best methods for improving volunteer satisfaction and retention. And this just supports that we've seen training as the best option for addressing the performance gap. Once we determined that the best performance intervention for addressing the volunteer performance skills gap was going to be to implement the structured training program for the volunteers, we had to determine the project goals or objectives. The first project goal, we knew we needed to develop a structured volunteer training program for the children's storytime volunteers. Currently, there was no structure. There was no actual training, if you will, besides the presentation of a PowerPoint and then the ability to ask questions as they go. So we needed a structured training program to equip these volunteers with the knowledge and skills necessary for delivering independent storytime sessions. Then we knew that the structured training program needed to have objectives that would prepare the children's storytime volunteers to actually deliver an effective and engaging storytelling presentation. So these objectives needed to be developing early literacy skills within storytelling presentations, maintaining children engagement, developing consistency in storytime presentations, and this would lead to attracting and retaining volunteers, increasing participant attendance and awareness, and ultimately aligning the program with the county library standards set for the program and the Pass Christian Library's mission statement. Now, we also wanted to expand the children's storytime program by increasing the number of consistent participants and volunteers. We knew that whenever the volunteers were equipped with the proper knowledge and skills to deliver effective and engaging storytelling presentations, that we would be improving the volunteer satisfaction and volunteer retention. And by doing so, we would also increase the participant satisfaction and participant retention, and that would lead to the expansion of the program. Once we set the project goals for the program, we had to determine how we were going to design implement, and evaluate the program. So that led us to determine the project deliverables. For this project, there was 11 deliverables, but we grouped them into 3 categories: project planning and management documents, training materials and implementation tools, and the evaluation and feedback assessments. The first group of deliverables, project planning and management documents. This includes your project contract, your project definition document, which covers your budget, your problem statement, your objectives, that sort of information. And then you have your work breakdown structure, which is a thorough breakdown of the whole entire project, from when you start with your project contract to when you deliver the final report to your stakeholders. This includes all of the tasks broke down into who's responsible for these tasks and the date completed. Then you have your evaluation plan. Your evaluation plan we had the Phillips Chain of Impact Business Alignment V-diagram matrix, and we used this to ensure each training element was aligned with the organizational goals and objectives we set for the program. Then we used the data collection plan, which followed a 5-stage Phillips methodology to gather data from all 5 evaluation stages that was relevant to the program and participants. So we gathered data regarding participant reaction, learning, application, business impact, and the return on investment. We also completed a return on investment analysis to showcase the financial and intangible benefits of the program. Evaluations are not only concerned with program effectiveness, but also the process of delivering programs, such as your organizational methods, your resources or your inputs, your intangible measures or your outputs, and cost effectiveness. And this is stated by Guiadines and Seasons. And it was for this reason that we knew that a thorough evaluation was going to be crucial to delivering an effective and engaging structured training program or performance improvement intervention. And then, of course, you have your final report. Your final report includes everything listed here in the project planning and management documents, as well as everything from your executive summary, your lessons learned, to your facilitator's guide. It is a complete outlook of the Children's Storytime Volunteer Training Program project. For the first group of deliverables, we had several successes. We had a clear project scope and alignment, structured workflow and accountability, comprehensive evaluation plan, and effective documentation for stakeholders. The project contract and definition document effectively established the project's purpose and alignment with the library's mission. It helped to guide decisions and to maintain focus on the project objectives. The work breakdown structure provided us with a clear sequence of tasks and deadlines and accountability for each of those tasks. The evaluation plan included specific and measurable objectives and aligned with the Phillips and Phillips Chain of Impact model, so this helped us assess learning, application, and even organizational impact. The effective documentation was in the form of the final report. The final report was presented in a professional summary and had the findings, outcomes, and recommendations, offering valuable insight for replication or future improvement of the Children's Storytime Volunteer Training Program. We did run into some challenges. We had time sensitivity because if we did not meet the deadline for each task, it would push back the deadline for the following task. And ultimately, this would have trickled down into pushing back the deadline for implementing the training program. And we had that date set for March 1st because we needed ample time following the training program to observe the advantages, benefits, or changes that the training program had on the volunteers' storytelling presentations. We also had to keep adjusting to evolve to the program needs. So as we dove deeper into the project, the more we got into the design process, the more we found there was little minor things that we had to keep adjusting. So we'd have to go back and fix that to make sure that the project stayed aligning with the objectives and stayed aligning with the Chain of Impact business alignment matrix. The second group of project deliverables is your training materials and your implementation tools. The first training material is the engagement technique handout. This handout reinforced key methods for child engagement, as lacking child engagement was one of the key issues that the Children's Storytime program faced, and one of the key reasons why we implemented the performance improvement intervention of the structured training program. The next training material was the advertisement flyer. While Miss Melanie did send out an email reminding all 12 volunteers about the training program, we also wanted a fun reminder. So as they're walking around the library, they would be able to look at it and be reminded of the training program. We had a training program PowerPoint as well that had embedded videos. The training program PowerPoint is the same one that Miss Melanie has used over the last decade when she has provided one-on-one training with incoming volunteers. It was modified to match and align with our training program's needs. However, a lot of that information was the same, and that is something that Miss Melanie has. However, we do have a facilitator's guide that walks you slide by slide through that PowerPoint presentation and how to deliver the Storytime volunteer training program to the volunteers. So while I don't have access to the actual PowerPoint, the facilitator's guide will walk you through everything that was included in the PowerPoint. And the facilitator's guide is located at the very last section of the final report for the project. And then lastly, of course, we have the structured training program, which is going to be used for future implementation or replication. On this slide, you can see the engagement technique handout deliverable that was created and the Children's Storytime Volunteer Training Program deliverable. While both of these project deliverables are very visually appealing, they are both very different in design and they are very simple. The simplicity of this and the difference in design was requested by Miss Melanie, the project sponsor. She wanted to easily be able to organize all of the different deliverables by site instead of having to sort through to determine which deliverable belonged in which section if they were all coordinating through design. The successes for this group of project deliverables was the structured and engaging content, the visual and practical support, and consistency and training content delivery. The training program and facilitator's guide offered a well-organized and interactive learning experience that made it easy for facilitators to lead future sessions and volunteers to stay engaged during the presentation. The PowerPoint and handouts provided visual reinforcement and actionable strategies that volunteers can apply in real time during future Storytime presentation delivery. The standardized materials help ensure that volunteers receive the same quality of training, maintaining consistency in content and expectations that they can then transfer to consistency among their Storytime delivery presentations. The challenges with this was limited testing and piloting. We did not have enough time to do a pilot test. We did, however, provide the PowerPoint, the handout, and the advertisement flyer to the head librarian and to other library patrons for their feedback, but we did not have time to actually do a pilot testing. And then there was varying volunteer learning styles. We found it hard with such short time to develop the learning materials to fully embrace all the different learning styles of the volunteers. The last category of project deliverables, group 3, is evaluation and feedback assessments. We gathered volunteer pre-program surveys, we implemented pre-program surveys to gather valuable data regarding the current knowledge and skill set of volunteers going into the training program, and we wanted to know what the volunteers wanted to gain from the training program. We also implemented a volunteer post-program surveys to gather the same data to assess, the volunteers' knowledge and skill set post-program, and we wanted to compare that to the baseline from the volunteers' pre-program surveys to compare if there was any growth or to see if learning had occurred. We also gathered participant post-program surveys. This was from parents and caregivers. We wanted to see their opinion on how the volunteers' presentation was, as far as how they did with child engagement, how they did with their storytelling techniques, and how they handled behavior or disruptions. Then we had a volunteer feedback form. This was to gather level 1 reaction data. We wanted to know how the volunteers perceived the training and how helpful they thought the training was. We also had volunteer self-assessments. We were going to use these in the form of a survey, but we already had so many other surveys, we did not want to issue out any more surveys. So we decided to do the volunteer self-assessment as a sort of one-on-one interview with Miss Melanie, where she could gather how the volunteers think or perceived their skill level after the training program, and if there was any discrepancy between their skill set and what was expected out of them, Miss Melanie could address it privately, and she would be able to help them ensure that they are fully confident, comfortable, and ready to deliver their own independent, effective, and engaging storytime presentation session. Here you can see the pre-training assessment and post-training assessment for the volunteers and the feedback form that was used during the training program. You can see that the designs are all different for easy organization, and you can also see that they're very simple in terms of limited number of questioning. We did use the Likert scale. We used open-ended questions, and we even had multiple choice questions as well. This was to determine the most effective and wide-ranging data. Again, the volunteer pre-training assessment was just used to assess the knowledge and skill level of the volunteers going into the program. The post-training survey gathered data on the same items, just post-training, and then the feedback form wanted to gather the level 1 reaction data to see how the participants perceived the training program overall. For the level 3 evaluation and feedback assessment project deliverables, the successes were measured growth and learning impact, well-rounded view of the program's effectiveness, data-driven improvements, and return on investment support. The use of pre and post surveys allowed for measurable comparison of volunteer confidence, understanding, and readiness to present the storytime sessions independently from before and after the training. Multiple perspectives ensured a well-rounded view of the program's effectiveness in areas like engagement and behavior management. The multiple perspectives coming from the data we gathered from the volunteers, from the parents and caregivers, as well as the facilitator and myself. Data-driven improvements come from the evaluation data that provided actionable insights that informed adjustments to the training content and delivery, making the program more responsive and effective. Evaluation results also helped align the program with the Phillips and Phillips chain of impact model, which supported the measurement of training outcomes and organizational goals. The challenges with this were survey fatigue. We had already implemented so many surveys that we were not sure if the quality of the data we gathered from the surveys was impacted due to this. The subjectivity of feedback was also a challenge. Even though we offered a variety of question formats on the open-ended questions, we still received generalized feedback. We also had inconsistent completion rates due to 2 volunteers not completing the pre and post surveys, so it made it difficult to track or assess if learning had occurred for those 2 volunteers. As we closed out our project deliverables, so we were done with the development, implementation, and evaluation of the project, we were able to reflect on the lessons learned and close out the project. The first lessons learned is that surveys can be insufficient for gathering credible data. We had to conduct interviews in addition to the surveys to address the gap in the credible data collection. Next, the participant variability. We had to be flexible and adaptable with the training process to ensure that the volunteers were able to address the different dynamic from the participant groups. Anything from a variation of age, the weather, or more boys than girls in the group can change how the group dynamic behaves to the storytelling presentation. And so we had to ensure that the volunteers would be able to address that, which means that the volunteers must also be adaptable. The volunteers had to be flexible. They had to adjust in real time because there is no way to predict what the group dynamic for that week's storytelling presentation is going to be. Chuck Hodel reminds us that one should always allow for the unexpected because chaos is born of the unanticipated events that can never be fully predicted. And this is absolutely true for delivering a storytelling presentation to children ages 2 through 4. You never know what you're going to get, so you have to be prepared for the unexpected at all times. That way you can take back control of the program and you can deliver an effective and engaging storytelling presentation still. Now, as we close out the lessons learned, we're also going to conclude the project. Hodel says that projects will always be a work in progress and should never be considered more than 90% of the way complete. This rings true for the Children's Storytime Volunteer Training Program because our program needs to continually be refined to improve the quality of the volunteers' children's storytime presentations. The volunteers eventually will move on and we will have a new influx of volunteers. The same will happen with the participants. The current participants will age out and there will be a new group of participants. And when that happens, the volunteers and the participants will have different needs. And the training program needs to meet the needs of both the participants and the volunteers. So the program is going to have to continually be refined to ensure that it continually meets the needs of the training program, of the volunteers, and of the participants. And by doing so, we allow the library to continue to offer a credible story time program where volunteers can foster a love of reading and learning among young children. And with that, I'm going to close this presentation on the overview of the Children's Storytime Volunteer Training Program. Again, my name is Alisa Woods and I was the project manager. I want to give another special thanks to Dr. Beadle and the committee for tuning in to today's presentation. I hope you enjoyed learning more about the Pass Christian Library Children's Storytime Program and how we developed, implemented, and evaluated the performance improvement intervention of the structured training program for the Storytime volunteers. I am going to provide references on the next 2 pages. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you again.